What if everything you have been taught to believe about money, struggle, and success is incomplete? Not because the world is unfair, but because your own subconscious has been quietly enforcing limits you never consciously chose. You were not born doubting wealth. You were not born fearing abundance, nor hesitating at opportunity, nor shrinking in the presence of power. Those habits were learned. They were absorbed invisibly, planted long before you developed the language to question them, and rehearsed daily until they became automatic. Napoleon Hill understood something that few dare to face. Poverty is not merely a condition of circumstance, it is first a condition of mind. Wealth, too, is not an accident of luck or privilege, but a state of consciousness that must be deliberately constructed. Until that construction is complete, money will feel distant, inconsistent, or temporary. The world responds not to what you wish for, but to what your subconscious accepts as natural. Most people live their entire lives attempting to solve financial problems on the surface. They change jobs, chase opportunities, blame systems, blame timing, blame other people. Yet the invisible machinery beneath their thoughts never changes. The same fears quietly guide their decisions. The same self-concepts dictate how much they believe they deserve. The same internal limits reject unfamiliar levels of success the moment they appear. Hill called this the great tragedy of human effort. Energy applied without definiteness of purpose, desire diluted by doubt, faith corrupted by fear. Your subconscious mind does not argue, it does not analyze, it does not negotiate, it obeys. It accepts repeated ideas as instructions and then works tirelessly to make reality conform to them. If you have been repeating scarcity through worry, hesitation, resentment, or self-justification, your subconscious has been carrying out your orders with flawless loyalty. It has been shaping your behavior, your perception, and your opportunities to match the identity you have been reinforcing. This is not punishment. It is precision. Hill taught that the mind is both the battlefield and the weapon. Wealth is never created through physical effort alone. It is conceived through a burning desire so intense it reorganizes the inner world. Without that desire, discipline collapses, persistence weakens, decision becomes hesitant, imagination shrinks, the subconscious follows the strongest emotional signal available, and most people unknowingly train it on fear rather than purpose. To rewire your subconscious for wealth, you must first confront a difficult truth. Money does not avoid you. You repel it through unconscious agreement with limitation. You may speak ambition aloud, but the subconscious listens to emotion, repetition, and belief. It listens to what you feel when you think about wealth. It listens to how you act when opportunity threatens your comfort. It listens to the story you tell yourself in moments of risk, and it builds your financial reality accordingly. Hill emphasized definiteness of purpose because the subconscious requires clarity to function effectively. A vague desire for wealth produces vague results, wanting more money without, deciding what wealth means, why you want it, and what price you are willing to pay leaves the subconscious confused. Confusion produces inconsistency. Inconsistency produces failure disguised as effort. Definiteness is not a motivational slogan. It is a command structure for the subconscious mind. When you decide with absolute clarity what you seek, the mind begins to organize around that decision. Perception sharpens. Opportunities that were once invisible suddenly appear. Discipline strengthens not because you force it, but because resistance fades. Hill described this as the moment desire becomes a burning flame rather than a casual wish. The subconscious responds only when desire crosses a certain threshold of intensity. Below that threshold, it remains passive. Above it, it becomes relentless. Faith, as Hill defined it, is not blind belief. It is belief reinforced through autosuggestion until doubt loses authority. The subconscious does not distinguish between reality and vividly imagined conviction. When an idea is emotionally charged and repeatedly impressed upon it, it is accepted as fact. Autosuggestion is the deliberate act of programming the subconscious with chosen thoughts rather than inherited ones. It is not affirmation in the shallow sense. It is mental conditioning. Every thought you repeatedly entertain becomes a habit. Every habit becomes a character trait. Every trait becomes destiny. This is the invisible chain Hill warned about. Break it at the level of thought, or live bound by it at the level of results. The wealthy thinker does not wait for evidence before believing. Evidence follows belief, not the other way around. The subconscious must first accept wealth as normal before behavior aligns with it. Persistence is the natural consequence of subconscious alignment. When your inner world is divided, persistence feels exhausting. When belief and purpose are unified, persistence becomes automatic. Hill observed that most people quit not because they are weak, but because they are internally conflicted. One part desires success, another fears responsibility, visibility, or change. The subconscious resolves this conflict by sabotaging progress. It chooses consistency over achievement. Self-discipline is not harshness, it is loyalty to a chosen identity. When you decide who you are becoming, discipline stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like integrity. The subconscious supports what aligns with identity and resists what contradicts it. This is why temporary motivation fails. Motivation does not rewire identity. Only sustained mental conditioning does. Fear is the most efficient tool of subconscious control. Hill identified fear of poverty as the most destructive, not because money itself is sacred, but because fear contracts imagination. Fear narrows perception. Fear convinces the subconscious that safety lies in familiarity rather than growth. When fear dominates, decision-making becomes reactive. Opportunities are evaluated through the lens of risk rather than potential. The subconscious prioritizes avoidance over creation. To master fear, you do not fight it emotionally, you starve it mentally. You replace it with disciplined thought patterns reinforced daily. You refuse to rehearse worst-case scenarios. You train imagination to visualize success with emotional intensity. The subconscious feeds on imagery. What you imagine vividly, it works to materialize. Most people imagine failure unconsciously and success vaguely. Wealth requires the opposite. Imagination, Hill taught, is the workshop of the mind. All fortunes begin as ideas shaped through imagination before taking physical form. But imagination without decision remains fantasy. Decision is the moment the subconscious receives a clear directive. The wealthy mind decides quickly and changes slowly. The poor mind hesitates endlessly and rationalizes indecision as caution. The subconscious interprets hesitation as lack of commitment and withdraws its support. Invisible mental forces govern every outcome. Thought attracts its physical equivalent. Emotional intensity magnetizes circumstances. Repetition ingrains belief. This is not mysticism, it is psychology disciplined into law. Hill's work was revolutionary because it treated success as a system rather than a mystery. Anyone willing to pay the mental price could access it. Most refused because the price is internal transformation. You are not rewiring your subconscious by listening passively. Rewiring requires engagement, repetition, and willingness to abandon old identities. Comfort is the enemy of wealth because comfort preserves existing programming. The subconscious clings to the familiar, even when the familiar is painful. Growth requires conscious disruption. As you continue, understand this: wealth is not something you chase, it is something you become, congruent with. Your subconscious must recognize abundance as aligned with who you are. Until then, every breakthrough will feel unstable. Every gain will trigger anxiety. Every success will be followed by self-sabotage. This is not fate, it is conditioning. Hill warned that the greatest danger is drifting, living without purpose, reacting instead of directing, consuming instead of creating. Drift dulls desire. It weakens imagination. It leaves the subconscious vulnerable to external influence. Society trains drift efficiently. Wealth demands resistance to it. This process is not gentle. It requires ruthless honesty with yourself. It requires acknowledging that your current financial reality reflects your dominant mental habits, not your potential. Potential is irrelevant without discipline. Desire is powerless without structure. Faith is fragile without reinforcement. The subconscious is being rewritten whether you choose it or not. Every thought you allow today becomes a command tomorrow. The question is not whether this process is happening. The question is whether you are directing it consciously or surrendering it unconsciously. As this journey continues, the language will become sharper, the demands will become heavier, the illusions will fall away. What remains will be a mind capable of wealth because it has been trained to think, decide, persist, and imagine at a higher level of order. Not hope, not wish, order. And once order is established internally, money follows externally with mechanical certainty. The subconscious does not respond to intention alone. It responds to consistency, emotional intensity, and repetition reinforced by conviction. This is where most people fail without ever realizing why. They think a single realization should change everything. They believe understanding is enough. Hill knew better. He understood that the mind is conditioned through pressure and persistence, not insight. Insight opens the door, but discipline forces you to walk through it. Your subconscious mind was not shaped overnight. It was trained slowly through years of observation, emotional reaction, and unchallenged belief. Every time you witnessed struggle and accepted it as normal, the subconscious recorded it. Every time you associated money with stress, guilt, corruption, or fear, it absorbed that association. Every time you retreated from opportunity to avoid discomfort, it learned that safety was more valuable than expansion. None of this required conscious agreement. The subconscious learns by exposure, not consent. Hill emphasized autosuggestion because it is the only method capable of reprogramming deeply rooted belief structures. Autosuggestion is not casual repetition. It is the deliberate act of pressing a chosen idea into the subconscious with emotional force until it replaces the old pattern. This requires solitude, silence, and focus. The mind cannot be reshaped in distraction. Noise protects existing programming. Stillness exposes it. When you speak to your subconscious, tone matters more than words. Emotion carries authority. If your autosuggestion lacks feeling, it lacks power. The subconscious responds to certainty, not language. You must speak as someone who has already decided, not someone hoping to be convinced. This is why Hill insisted on faith cultivated through repetition. Faith is manufactured, not discovered. The average person waits for confidence before acting. The disciplined mind acts first and allows confidence to follow. The subconscious does not wait for readiness, it adapts to behavior. When you behave as someone aligned with wealth even before belief feels complete, the subconscious begins to reorganize to reduce internal conflict. Identity follows action faster than action follows identity. This is the hidden leverage point. You cannot think your way into wealth without behaving accordingly, nor can you behave consistently without mental alignment. The two must be trained together. Hill's genius was recognizing that behavior becomes sustainable only after subconscious acceptance, and subconscious acceptance requires proof delivered through action. Most people sabotage themselves during this phase. They demand immediate external results as validation. When results delay, doubt creeps in. Doubt weakens emotional intensity. Emotional intensity fades, and the subconscious receives mixed signals. Progress stalls. Hill warned that impatience is evidence of shallow desire. A burning desire endures silence without retreat. The subconscious does not operate on clocks. It operates on patterns. When a new pattern is introduced, it resists initially because resistance preserves identity. This resistance is felt as discomfort, fatigue, anxiety, or self-doubt. Many mistake this resistance for a sign of failure. In reality, it is evidence that reprogramming has begun. The old identity is fighting for survival. Wealth consciousness requires the death of familiar mental habits. The subconscious mourns what it loses, even when what it loses is limitation. This mourning period is where persistence proves its value. Hill defined persistence not as stubbornness, but as the refusal to negotiate with fear. Fear will offer logic, statistics, and past experiences as evidence. The disciplined mind acknowledges fear without obeying it. Self-discipline, in Hill's framework, is the ability to control emotional reaction. Emotion unchecked becomes command. Emotion mastered becomes fuel. Anger, frustration, and impatience can either sabotage progress or harden resolve. The difference lies in mental governance. Wealthy minds do not eliminate emotion, they direct it. Your subconscious learns fastest during emotionally charged moments. This is why crises either break people or remake them. Emotion amplifies imprinting. If you allow panic to dominate during pressure, the subconscious learns avoidance. If you assert control during pressure, it learns resilience. Every reaction is a lesson. Hill identified fear as the primary obstacle, not because fear is natural, but because it is contagious within the mind. One fear breeds another. Fear of poverty breeds fear of criticism. Fear of criticism breeds fear of decision. Fear of decision breeds procrastination. Procrastination becomes habit. Habit becomes character. Character becomes destiny. This chain operates invisibly unless interrupted deliberately. To interrupt it, you must become conscious of your internal dialogue. The subconscious listens constantly. It does not sleep. It records tone, not truth. When you complain internally, you instruct it to expect disappointment. When you rationalize delay, you teach it avo. Idence. When you rehearse past failure, you reinforce identity. Hill insisted that imagination must be actively governed because imagination unmanaged defaults to fear. The mind naturally visualizes danger more vividly than success. This is evolutionary, not personal. Wealth requires overriding this instinct. You must deliberately visualize outcomes you have never experienced with detail and emotional richness. The subconscious cannot distinguish between lived experience and imagined experience when emotion is present. This is not fantasy. Fantasy lacks discipline and structure. Imagination under control becomes rehearsal. Rehearsal conditions behavior. Behavior conditions identity. Identity conditions destiny. The chain always leads back to the subconscious. Decision is the moment imagination solidifies into direction. Hill observed that successful people share one trait above all others, decisiveness, not because they are always right, but because decision ends internal debate. Debate drains energy. Decision concentrates it. The subconscious thrives on clarity. Indecision keeps it passive. Most people confuse caution with intelligence. In reality, excessive caution is fear wearing respectable clothing. The subconscious does not reward caution, it rewards commitment. Once a decision is made, it begins aligning perception and opportunity accordingly. Before decision, it waits. Invisible forces respond to certainty. Hill described this as the coordination of mental and physical energies. When thought, emotion, and action align, resistance diminishes. Circumstances begin to shift not through magic, but through behavioral consistency that compounds quietly. You must understand that wealth is not created through extraordinary actions performed occasionally. It is created through ordinary actions performed consistently under a unified mental direction. The subconscious, us, is the keeper of that direction. Without it, effort fragments. During this phase of rewiring, you will feel moments of isolation. Old conversations will feel irrelevant. Old ambitions will feel small. This is not arrogance, it is recalibration. The subconscious is shedding outdated reference points. Hill warned that growth often requires separation from environments that reinforce limitation. This does not mean withdrawal from society. It means internal independence. You stop outsourcing belief. You stop seeking permission to expand. You stop negotiating your vision with people who cannot see it. The subconscious requires a protected environment to recondition effectively. Faith strengthens through evidence, and evidence begins internally. The first proof of change is not money. It is behavior. It is the absence of hesitation where hesitation once lived. It is calm under pressure. It is persistence without applause. These are signs that the subconscious is shifting allegiance. As this shift continues, your perception of money changes. Money stops feeling emotional and starts feeling structural. It becomes a tool, not a judge. You stop measuring self-worth through income fluctuations. This emotional neutrality is essential. Emotional volatility around money keeps the subconscious reactive. Wealth requires stability. Hill emphasized mastery over self because external mastery without internal control collapses. Many achieve temporary wealth and lose it because the subconscious never accepted abundance as permanent. It treated success as an anomaly rather than identity. Once pressure returned, it reverted to familiar patterns. You are training permanence. That requires patience measured in discipline, not time. Each day you reinforce the same mental commands. Each day you reject fear-based narratives. Each day you behave as someone aligned with purpose rather than mood. This is how rewiring occurs. There will be days when belief feels strong and days when it feels distant. The subconscious does not require emotional perfection. It requires consistency. Show up regardless of mood, act regardless of doubt, persist regardless of silence. These are commands more powerful than affirmations. Hill wrote that when desire is intense enough, it finds expression through organized effort. Organization begins internally. Disorganization within the mind produces chaos externally. Order within produces opportunity without strain. You are not chasing wealth. You are constructing a mind that cannot avoid it. The subconscious will test your resolve by presenting familiar distractions, old habits, and rational excuses. These tests are not obstacles, they are confirmations. Each refusal strengthens the new pattern. Each discipline reinforces identity. At this stage, nothing dramatic may appear externally. That is expected. The foundation is being poured underground. Impatience would crack it. Stay still internally while moving forward externally. The person you are becoming is not motivated by emotion. They are governed by principle. Principle outlives feeling. Wealth is the natural byproduct of principle lived daily. As this process deepens, you will notice a quiet confidence emerging. Not bravado, not optimism, certainty. Certainty does not announce itself. It operates. The subconscious is learning a new normal. Soon, effort that once felt heavy will feel automatic. Decisions that once caused anxiety will feel neutral. Opportunities that once intimidated you will feel appropriate. This is not transformation as spectacle. It is transformation as alignment. And alignment, once established, is unstoppable. Once the subconscious begins to accept a new standard, it does something subtle yet profound. It rewrites what feels possible with asking your permission. This is where the true rewiring accelerates. What once felt unrealistic begins to feel merely unfamiliar. What once felt intimidating begins to feel procedural. The internal resistance that drained your energy does not vanish all at once. It dissolves quietly, replaced by an almost unsettling sense of inevitability. Hill described this stage as the moment when desire stops asking and starts expecting. Expectation is not hope. Expectation is alignment between belief and identity. When expectation is present, the mind no longer scans the world for permission. It scans for coordination. The subconscious begins filtering information differently. Conversations land differently. Opportunities register faster. You notice patterns you previously ignored because they contradicted your self-image. Wealth consciousness sharpens perception by eliminating internal contradiction. Most people live with split identities. They want wealth but identify as cautious. They desire freedom but identify as realistic. They crave abundance but identify as modest. The subconscious cannot serve two masters. It resolves contradiction by defaulting to the identity reinforced most consistently. This is why verbal ambition without behavioral confirmation fails. Hill understood that the subconscious believes what you repeatedly act out, not what you occasionally declare. As the new identity strengthens, fear changes form. It becomes quieter, more intellectual, more persuasive. It disguises itself as logic. It suggests waiting for better conditions, more information, greater certainty. This is the most dangerous phase because fear no longer feels emotional, it feels reasonable. Hill warned that this is where many intelligent people stall permanently. Their intellect becomes a prison, rationalizing inaction with sophistication. The disciplined mind recognizes this trap. It understands that certainty is not a prerequisite for progress. Progress creates certainty. The subconscious learns through motion. Action sends clearer signals than contemplation ever will. When you move decisively despite incomplete information, you train the subconscious to trust your leadership. Trust eliminates internal resistance. Leadership of the self is the foundation of wealth. If you cannot command your own thoughts, you will never command resources. The world does not reward unmanaged minds with power. It rewards order, consistency, and clarity. Hill's philosophy was never about money itself. Money was simply the most visible indicator of mental organization. As the subconscious reorganizes, your relationship with effort changes. You stop romanticizing struggle. You stop equating hardship with virtue. You become efficient. You remove friction wherever possible. The wealthy mind values leverage over exhaustion. This is not laziness, it is intelligence applied inwardly. Wasted effort is a sign of mental disorganization. Imagination becomes more disciplined at this stage. You no longer imagine wildly, you imagine precisely. You rehearse outcomes with specificity. You feel them as completed, realities rather than distant fantasies. This precision matters. The subconscious responds more strongly to detail than abstraction. Vague images produce weak impressions. Detailed visualization produces behavioral alignment. Hill emphasized that imagination must be married to decision. Without decision, imagination wanders. With decision, imagination sharpens into strategy. Strategy is imagination constrained by purpose. The subconscious thrives under constraint because constraint eliminates ambiguity. Ambiguity drains energy. Clarity conserves it. You will notice that procrastination loses its grip not because you force productivity, but because delay feels incongruous. You went with who you are becoming. Identity-based discipline is effortless compared to willpower-based discipline. Willpower exhausts. Identity sustains. Hill's work was revolutionary because it shifted the source of discipline from force to alignment. Fear of failure begins to dissolve because failure loses its emotional charge. It becomes data rather than verdict. The subconscious stops associating failure with identity threat. This is critical. When failure no longer threatens self-concept, persistence becomes natural. Quitting becomes illogical. This is the mental posture required for wealth that endures. At this point, the mind becomes less reactive to external opinion. Praise and criticism lose their power. Hill identified fear of criticism as one of the most paralyzing forces in human psychology. When you stop outsourcing identity, criticism becomes information rather than judgment. The subconscious remains stable regardless of external noise. Stability is wealth's quiet requirement. Emotional volatility repels consistency. Consistency attracts opportunity. The world rewards those whose behavior can be predicted under pressure. Investors, partners, clients, and systems respond to reliability. Reliability is a psychological trait before it is a reputation. As your subconscious stabilizes, time perception changes. You become more patient without becoming passive. You understand that compounding requires duration. You stop seeking shortcuts and start seeking systems. Systems are the external expression of internal order. Hill spoke often of organized effort because organization multiplies energy. You also become more selective. Not every opportunity deserves attention. Scarcity thinking grabs everything. Abundance thinking chooses deliberately. The subconscious trained in wealth does not panic at missed chances. It trusts that aligned action produces recurring opportunity. This trust reduces desperation. Desperation distorts judgment. Money itself begins to lose emotional symbolism. It stops representing safety, validation, or escape. It becomes neutral. Neutrality is power. Emotional attachment creates volatility. Detachment creates control. Hill understood that those who worship money are ruled by it, while those who understand it command it. As this internal shift deepens, you may experience a period of external lag. Internally, you feel different, but circumstances have not yet caught up. This is where many doubt the process. They mistake delay for denial. In reality, this lag is structural. Behavior must compound before results surface. The subconscious is patient. It understands sequences. Trusting this lag is part of faith. Faith at this level is no longer belief in possibility. It is belief in process. You no longer need emotional reassurance. You need adherence. This is mature faith. It is quiet, disciplined, and unwavering. Hill described it as confidence born of repeated alignment, not blind optimism. During this phase, old temptations resurface. Comfort calls louder. Distractions feel more seductive. This is not coincidence. The old identity senses obsolescence and seeks reinforcement. If you return to familiar habits, it regains ground. If you remain disciplined, it fades permanently. This is the final test of rewiring. Persistence here is not dramatic, it is almost boring. You do the same things regardless of mood, you think the same thoughts regardless of circumstance. You act from principle rather than impulse. This consistency sends the strongest signal the subconscious can receive. Identity locks in. Once locked, effort becomes fluid. You no longer question whether you deserve success. You no longer negotiate with fear. You no longer seek motivation. You execute. Execution is the natural output of a disciplined subconscious. At this stage, wealth ceases to be a goal and becomes an outcome. You stop measuring progress emotionally and start measuring it structurally. Systems improve, decisions sharpen, relationships align, the external world begins mirroring the internal order with increasing speed. Hill wrote that when the mind is ready, opportunity appears. This is not mysticism, it is perception. You now recognize what was previously invisible. You act where others hesitate. You persist where others retreat. You decide where others drift. The difference is mental, not circumstantial. The subconscious is now an ally rather than an obstacle. It no longer sabotages progress to preserve familiarity. It protects growth because growth has become familiar. This is the turning point. Once reached, regression requires conscious effort. Forward motion becomes default. You are no longer becoming wealthy. You are operating from wealth consciousness. The distinction matters. Becoming implies effort toward an identity. Operating implies embodiment of it. From here, the work intensifies not externally, but internally. The standards rise. The margin for self-deception narrows. The demand for integrity sharpens. Wealth at higher levels tolerates no internal disorder. And that is where the true test begins. As the subconscious settles into this higher order, it begins enforcing standards without emotional drama. What once required effort now requires obedience. You notice a tightening of internal tolerance. Excuses that once felt reasonable now feel foreign. Distractions that once felt harmless now feel intrusive. This is not self-denial, it is self-respect. The mind that has accepted wealth as identity refuses to behave in ways that contradict it. Hill spoke often of the law of habit, not as a moral idea, but as a mechanical one. Habits are the subconscious made visible. When the subconscious has been rewired, habits follow without struggle. This is why discipline becomes quiet. You are no longer negotiating with yourself, you are enforcing alignment. At this level, self-discipline expresses itself most strongly in emotional control. Emotional reactivity becomes the greatest threat to sustained success. Anger, resentment, envy, and impatience all signal a loss of internal governance. The wealthy mind does not suppress emotion, it delays reaction. Delay creates choice. Choice preserves power. Power, as Hill defined it, is organized knowledge directed by purpose. Emotional chaos disorganizes knowledge. The subconscious, once trained, protects order aggressively. It will generate discomfort when you drift from principle. This discomfort is guidance, not punishment. Ignoring it leads to regression. You begin to understand why so many people self-sabotage at higher levels of success. They mistake discomfort for danger. In reality, discomfort often signals growth pressing against outdated identity. The subconscious, if untrained, interprets this as threat and retreats. The trained subconscious interprets it as expansion and advances. Imagination evolves again here. It becomes less about visualizing outcomes and more about anticipating obstacles without emotional charge. You imagine challenges not to fear them, but to neutralize them mentally before they appear. This is strategic imagination. Hill emphasized that preparedness dissolves fear. Fear thrives on surprise. Decision-making becomes faster, not because you are reckless, but because you trust your judgment. Trust is built through repetition of aligned action. Each correct decision reinforces confidence. Each misstep analyzed without self-condemnation strengthens wisdom. The subconscious learns that mistakes are survivable, even useful. This removes hesitation. One of the most critical shifts at this stage is your relationship with time. You stop rushing. You stop procrastinating. You operate on rhythm rather than urgency. Urgency is fear-based. Rhythm is purpose-based. The subconscious prefers rhythm because it reduces chaos. Wealth compounds in environments of rhythm. Hill warned against drifting into comfort after initial success. Comfort dulls vigilance. Vigilance preserves standards. You must understand that success is not a plateau, it is a process. The moment you stop directing the mind, it begins absorbing external influence again. Maintenance is non-negotiable. Autosuggestion does not end once belief is installed. It becomes reinforcement rather than installation. You continue impressing the subconscious with chosen thoughts because the environment continues attempting to overwrite them. Mental sovereignty requires constant defense. At this level, the invisible mental forces Hill described become more apparent. You notice that when your inner state is ordered, interactions flow. When your state is disordered, resistance appears. This is not coincidence. Human systems respond to psychological coherence. People trust certainty. They respond to calm authority. You also notice that money responds to structure. When systems are clear, money moves efficiently. When systems are chaotic, money leaks. This mirrors the mind. Disorganized thinking produces financial leakage. Organized thinking produces retention and growth. Wealth is less about acquisition than about control. Fear has not disappeared, but it has lost its authority. It presents itself occasionally, offering caution, but it no longer dictates behavior. You have learned to separate signal from noise. Useful fear informs preparation. Useless fear informs retreat. The disciplined mind knows the difference. At this stage, you stop seeking external validation entirely. Approval becomes irrelevant. This is dangerous for those who crave belonging, but essential for those who seek mastery. Hill noted that greatness often requires standing alone mentally, even while participating socially. Independence of thought is non-negotiable. Your internal dialogue becomes sparse. You waste fewer words mentally. You think in directives rather than narratives. Stories justify, directives execute. The subconscious responds more efficiently to commands than explanations. This mental economy increases effectiveness. You also become more intolerant of mental clutter. Excess consumption, excessive social noise, and constant stimulation weaken focus. The wealthy mind protects its attention fiercely. Attention is currency. Where it flows determines outcomes. Imagination now works in service of leverage. You seek methods that multiply effort rather than consume it. This applies not only to business, but to relationships, learning, and decision-making. The subconscious trained in wealth seeks efficiency instinctively. Hill emphasized that definiteness of purpose must be renewed periodically. Purpose evolves as capacity expands. What once felt ambitious now feels small. This is not dissatisfaction, it is growth. The subconscious requires new targets to remain engaged. Stagnation invites drift. You begin to experience a subtle shift in how challenges appear. Problems arrive with solutions embedded within them. This is not optimism, it is pattern recognition sharpened by discipline. The mind trained in order sees structure where others see chaos. The emotional weight of money continues to fade. You are no longer impressed by it. You respect it. Respect breeds stewardship. Stewardship sustains wealth. Many lose wealth because they are intoxicated by it. Intoxication weakens judgment. As your standards rise, relationships adjust. Some connections fade naturally. OT. Hers deepen. This is not abandonment, it is alignment. The subconscious gravitates toward environments that reinforce identity. Resistance creates friction. Alignment creates ease. You also become more patient with others without compromising standards. You understand that not everyone operates at the same level of mental discipline. You stop trying to convert. You demonstrate through consistency. Influence replaces persuasion. Hill wrote that the greatest power available to man is self-mastery. At this level, that statement becomes lived reality. You feel it in your reactions, your decisions, your calm under pressure. This calm is not passive, it is controlled intensity. The work now is refinement, removing inefficiencies, strengthening weak points, anticipating threats, expanding capacity without losing order. This is where wealth becomes durable. Durability requires humility. Arrogance blinds perception. The disciplined mind remains teachable without becoming submissive. It absorbs information selectively. It rejects noise ruthlessly. As this phase continues, you realize that the true reward of wealth consciousness is not money itself, but sovereignty. Sovereignty over thought, emotion, and direction. Money becomes a byproduct of that sovereignty, not its source. You are no longer fighting the mind. You are governing it. And governance once established demands vigilance without fatigue. This is the threshold most never reached, not because it is inaccessible, but because it requires internal order maintained without applause. From here, the stakes increase, and so does the responsibility. At this level of internal mastery, you begin to recognize a truth that most never confront without resistance. Success is not sustained by desire, but by identity discipline. Desire initiates movement, but identity governs behavior when desire fades. The subconscious CE rewired no longer responds to excitement. It responds to alignment. You are no longer driven by wanting more. You are driven by refusing to violate who you have become. This is where many collapse quietly, not loudly, not dramatically. They drift. They loosen standards incrementally. One compromise becomes two. One excuse becomes routine. Nothing explodes immediately. Nothing seems lost. And yet internally order begins to decay. Hill warned that drifting is rarely recognized while it is happening. It feels like relief. It feels like balance. It feels like reward. Until consequences arrive fully formed. The disciplined subconscious detects drift instantly. It responds with discomfort, restlessness, irritation, or unease. These signals are not emotional problems. They are warnings. Ignore them and disorder spreads. Address them, and stability is restored. Wealth consciousness does not numb discomfort. It interprets it. At this phase, mental laziness becomes the greatest threat. Not physical laziness, mental laziness. Allowing thoughts to wander unchecked. Allowing assumptions to replace verification. Allowing emotional reactions to go unexamined. The subconscious, if left ungoverned, will revert to efficiency shortcuts that favor familiarity over precision. Precision must be enforced deliberately. Hill emphasized that the human mind naturally seeks the path of least resistance. Wealth requires resistance to that instinct, not through struggle, but through structure. Structure eliminates unnecessary decisions. Structure preserves energy. Structure protects focus. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. At this stage, systems are not external tools alone. They are internal protocols. How you start your day, how you process information, how you respond to pressure, how you interpret setbacks, how you decide when emotio. N is present. Each protocol reinforces subconscious loyalty to order. You become acutely aware of how fragile success is in undisciplined hands. You see others rise quickly and collapse faster, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack internal governance. Their subconscious never accepted responsibility at scale. When pressure increased, fear reasserted control. Responsibility at this level is not limited to outcomes. It extends to influence. People respond to your certainty, your calm, your decisiveness. This influence is not optional. It exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Hill warned that leadership emerges naturally around disciplined minds. The question is whether that leadership is exercised consciously or irresponsibly. You begin to understand why integrity is non-negotiable. Not moral integrity alone, but internal integrity. Alignment between thought, word, and action. The subconscious fractures when integrity breaks. Fracture weakens confidence. Weak confidence invites hesitation. Hesitation slows execution. Slow execution loses advantage. Money magnifies integrity. It does not create it. This is why wealth exposes character rather than improving it. Your subconscious, now trained, understands this clearly. It will not allow you to expand faster than your internal order can sustain. This is protection, not limitation. At this stage, your emotional world becomes quieter, not numb, controlled. You experience fewer emotional spikes because fewer events penetrate identity. You no longer personalize setbacks. You no longer inflate victories. Emotional neutrality becomes strength. Strength attracts stability. Hill described this as the point where the mind becomes impregnable to external suggestion. This does not mean arrogance, it means selectivity. You listen without absorbing. You observe without reacting. You evaluate without disturbance. This mental posture is rare because it requires long-term discipline without immediate reward. The subconscious now functions like a trained guard rather than an impulsive child. It screens inputs. It rejects disempowering narratives automatically. It reinforces purpose without conscious effort. This transformation is invisible to others, but unmistakable to you. You also begin to recognize the role of solitude. Not isolation, but deliberate withdrawal from noise. Solitude allows recalibration. It prevents contamination. The disciplined mind schedules solitude the way others schedule entertainment. Without it, external influence accumulates unnoticed. At this level, success becomes less about expansion and more about preservation. Preservation of clarity, preservation of rhythm, preservation of standards. Expansion happens naturally when preservation is maintained. This paradox confuses those who chase growth aggressively. They burn out because they neglect maintenance. Hill emphasized that sustained success is always quieter than initial ascent. Noise attracts attention. Silence preserves power. You stop announcing intentions because intention is already operational. You stop explaining choices because explanation invites interference. You also become deeply intolerant of self-deception. Subtle lies feel corrosive. Rationalizations feel dangerous. The subconscious, now disciplined, demands honesty even when inconvenient. This honesty prevents internal fragmentation. At this stage, ambition no longer feels like hunger. It feels like obligation. Obligation to execute fully. Obligation to maintain order. Obligation to honor the mental structure you have built. Letting it decay would be betrayal of effort already invested. Hill warned that the subconscious never forgets the standards it has been trained to uphold. Once elevated, regression produces suffering. This suffering is not punishment, it is misalignment. The mind is signaling violation of identity. You now understand that wealth is not permission to relax discipline. It is proof that discipline works. The moment discipline is abandoned, the subconscious withdraws support. Not immediately, but inevitably. At this phase, life simplifies, not because complexity disappears, but because priorities narrow. Fewer things matter. The essential becomes obvious. Noise becomes irrelevant. You stop chasing stimulation. You protect focus. Focus is now your most valuable currency. You allocate it deliberately. You do not spend it on trivialities. You do not waste it on emotional drama. You do not allow it to be hijacked by urgency manufactured by others. Hill wrote that concentration is the secret of power. At this level, concentration is effortless because distractions no longer appeal. The subconscious has learned that distraction threatens identity. You also recognize that this path is lonely by design, not socially, but mentally. Few operate at this level of internal order. Fewer still understand it. You stop expecting understanding. Expectation creates resentment. Acceptance creates peace. The peace you experience now is not comfort. It is stability. Stability is calm under responsibility. It is confidence without arrogance. It is intensity without chaos. As this phase nears completion, a final realization settles in. Nothing external can now elevate or destroy you without your consent. Circumstances may change, markets may shift, people may come and go, but the internal structure remains intact. This is the true achievement Hill pointed toward, but rarely saw people reach. Not money, not status, not recognition, mental sovereignty. The subconscious has been trained to serve purpose rather than fear, to execute rather than hesitate, to persist rather than retreat, to decide rather than drift, What remains is not learning, but commitment, and commitment, once demanded at this level, allows no retreat. Now you stand at the edge of the only line that has ever mattered, the line most people never consciously see, let alone cross, the line between knowing and committing, between understanding and obedience, between insight and irrevocable decision. Everything you have absorbed up to this point has been preparation, not completion. Napoleon Hill never wrote for spectators. He wrote for those willing to accept the heaviest truth of all, that once the mind is shown the law, ignorance is no longer an excuse, and hesitation becomes a choice with consequences. The subconscious you now possess is no longer innocent. It has been trained to recognize cause and effect. It understands that every thought is a seed, every emotion is fertilizer, and every repeated decision is a command. You can no longer claim confusion. You can no longer hide behind circumstance. The moment you see the mechanism, you become responsible for its use. This is the burden few are willing to carry, and it is why most retreat quietly back into distraction once clarity appears. Hill understood that clarity terrifies more than uncertainty, because clarity removes alibis. When you know that wealth is created internally before it is expressed externally, every excuse collapses. You can no longer blame the market when discipline fails. You can no longer blame timing when decision is delayed. You can no longer blame luck when persistence weakens. The mirror becomes unavoidable, and the mirror shows only one authority. You, at this final stage, the subconscious demands a verdict. Not another rehearsal, not another plan, not another period of preparation, a verdict. Will you live as the person who governs the mind daily, or will you return to drifting with better vocabulary? Will you enforce mental discipline when no one is watching, or will you allow comfort to dismantle what focus built? Will you choose purpose when emotion argues against it, or will you surrender authority back to fear disguised as reason? This is where success stops being philosophical and becomes judicial. A ruling must be issued. Hill wrote that decision is the master key because decision ends inner debate. Debate drains power. Decision concentrates it. Until this moment, your mind has been learning. From this moment forward, it must obey. Understand this clearly. The world will not test you gently after this point. It will test you precisely. It will test you in silence, not spectacle. It will test you with small compromises rather than dramatic failures. It will offer you comfort when vigilance is required, explanation when action is demanded, and delay when momentum must be preserved. These tests will not announce themselves as tests. They will feel reasonable. That is the danger. Your subconscious now knows that wealth is not granted, it is permitted by alignment. It knows that every deviation weakens signal, every excuse introduces noise, every lapse invites drift. You cannot unknow this. If you attempt to return to unconscious living, the discomfort will be sharper than before. Ignorance was once protection. Now it is gone. Hill warned that the price of greatness is eternal vigilance over the mind. Eternal does not mean exhausting. It means uncompromising. It means you do not negotiate with habits that threaten identity. You do not rationalize thoughts that erode purpose. You do not indulge emotions that destabilize direction. You observe, correct, and proceed. From this point forward, the discipline required is not heroic. It is relentless in its simplicity. You will think deliberately when reaction is easier. You will persist when retreat feels justified. You will decide when hesitation feels intelligent. You will imagine outcomes worth enduring discomfort for. You will command your subconscious daily through repetition, emotion, and action, not because you are uncertain, but because reinforcement preserves power. You must accept that wealth consciousness isolates you mentally from the majority. This is not superiority, it is separation by standards. Most people will never understand why you refuse certain conversations, certain habits, certain comforts. They will interpret discipline as rigidity, focus as obsession, silence as distance. Let them. Explanation weakens resolve. Results require no translation. Hill wrote that the person who conquers himself gains a power that circumstances cannot revoke. That conquest is not a one-time victory. It is renewed daily through choice. Each morning you decide whether you will command the mind or allow the world to command it for you. There is no neutral position. Neutrality is drift-wearing, polite language. You now know that faith is not emotion, but loyalty to a chosen direction. You know that persistence is not stubbornness, but refusal to abandon identity. You know that imagination is not fantasy, but rehearsal for execution. You know that fear is not an enemy, but a signal to strengthen structure. You know that wealth is not money, but order expressed materially. This knowledge demands payment. The payment is consistency without applause. The payment is integrity without recognition. The payment is discipline when motivation is absent. The payment is responsibility without rescue. Most will refuse to pay it because it offers no immediate relief. But relief has never built anything enduring. Your subconscious is ready to serve at a higher level, but it will only serve a decisive master. Indecision returns authority to fear. Drift returns authority to environment. Complaining returns authority to circumstance. You must decide who governs now because governance has already begun. Do not wait for confidence. Confidence is a byproduct of obedience. Do not wait for certainty. Certainty is manufactured through action. Do not wait for permission. Permission is granted only after results appear, and results appear only after permission is no longer required. This is the moment Hill was pointing toward in every page he ever wrote. Not the promise of riches, but the demand for self-command. Riches were never the gift, they were the evidence. So hear this clearly and do not soften it to make it comfortable. Decide now that your mind will no longer be a democracy, it will be governed. Decide now that your thoughts will be chosen, not inherited. Decide now that your emotions will be directed, not indulged. Decide now that your purpose will be enforced, not negotiated. Decide now that persistence will continue regardless of silence, delay, or doubt. Decide now that drifting is no longer an option you allow yourself. Stand up internally and issue the command your subconscious has been waiting for. Declare without drama and without retreat that you accept total responsibility for your mental environment, your decisions, your actions, and your outcomes. Accept that whatever follows is earned, not given. Accept that whatever fails must be corrected, not excused. This is not motivation. This is initiation. From this moment forward, live as if every thought is a vote for the life you will inhabit. Live as if discipline is not a task but a duty. Live as if your subconscious is listening, because it is. Live as if your purpose demands execution, because it does. Live if no rescue is coming, because none ever was. Make the decision permanent. Make the discipline daily. Make the responsibility total. And do not turn back.